In the previous segment, we saw that the basic polytheistic insight is that the supreme power of the universe has no interests and no biases. So if people want help in their mundane affairs, they should address one of the subordinate gods rather than the supreme power. And each person could choose whatever gods or gods were most suitable to him. One person wanted to worship Apollo, another person worshipped Zeus, a third person worshipped Aphrodite, and so forth. With time, however, followers of certain polytheistic gods, they became so fond of their particular god that they drifted away from this basic insight. They began to believe that their particular god is not one among many, but is the only God, and that he is in fact identical to the supreme power of the universe. Yet, at the same time, they continued to view their God as having interests and biases. They continued to believe that their God, even though it is the supreme power of the universe, it still cares about the mundane affairs of humans, and that they can still make all kinds of deals with this God, like doing this sacrifice in exchange for getting victory in war or rain or whatever. This is how monotheistic religions were born. Monotheist religions believe that you could make deals with the supreme power of the universe in order to recover from illness or win the lottery or gain victory in war. The first monotheistic religion, which we know about for sure, appeared in ancient Egypt about 1350 BC, when Pharaoh Akhenaten declared that one of the previously minor deities of the Egyptian pantheon, the god Aten, was in fact the supreme power ruling the entire universe and all the other gods and goddesses. Akhenaten institutionalized the worship of Aten as the state religion and tried to stop the worship of all the other gods and goddesses. His religious revolution, however, was unsuccessful. After he died or was murdered, we are not sure, the worship of Aten was abandoned and the Egyptians returned to worshipping the old pantheon of gods and goddesses. Over the centuries, polytheism continued to give birth here and there to other monotheist religions, but they remained marginal, not least because they failed to digest, to understand their own universal message. Judaism, for example, is a religion that argued that the supreme power of the universe has biases and interests, but his chief interest is in the small Jewish nation and in the obscure land of Israel. And Judaism had very little to offer other lands and other nations, so it's no wonder that it remained a rather marginal religion and did not spread very widely. The big breakthrough of monotheism came only with Christianity in the beginning of the first millennium AD. Christianity at first was no more than an esoteric Jewish sect that taught Jews that Jesus of Nazareth was their long-awaited Messiah. However, one of the first leaders of the Christian sect, a man by the name of Paul of Tarsus, he reasoned that if the supreme power of the universe has interests and biases, and if he had bothered to incarnate himself in the flesh and to die on the cross for the salvation of humankind, then this is something that everybody should hear about, not just the Jews. And Paul's arguments fell on fertile ground. Christians began to organize widespread missionary activities which were aimed at all human beings, not only at Jews. And in one of the strangest twists ever in human history, this tiny, persecuted, esoteric Jewish sect managed to take over the mighty Roman Empire, and from this base spread later on over greater and greater parts of the world. The amazing success of the Christians later on served as the model for another monotheistic religion that appeared in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, Islam. Like Christianity, Islam too began as a small sect in a remote corner of the world. But in an even stranger and swifter historical surprise, Islam managed to break out of the deserts of Arabia and to conquer an immense empire stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean and beyond. Henceforth, the monotheistic idea became a central player in world history. Monotheists, it's important to realize about them something, and this is that they tended to be, not always, but in many occasions, much more fanatical and also much more missionary than polytheists. A religion that recognizes the legitimacy of other faith implies either that its God is not the supreme power of the universe, or that it received from the one and only God only part of the universal truth. This is something that polytheists were able to live with, but monotheists could not live with these ideas, since monotheists usually believed that they are in possession of the entire message of the one and only God. They were compelled to discredit all other religions. If our religion is true, no other religion can also simultaneously be true. Over the last 2 millennia, monotheists repeatedly tried to prove the truth of their religion and to strengthen their position simply by exterminating all the competition with violence, with persecutions and holy wars. Whereas polytheists very rarely wage religious wars and persecutions, monotheists began to wage a lot of them. And it worked. At the beginning of the 1st century AD, there were hardly any monotheists in the world. Over the last 2,000 years, monotheist religions became the dominant religions of the entire world, with the exception of East and Southeast Asia, where Hinduism and Buddhism and Confucianism, which we'll discuss later, are still dominant. Yet polytheism and animism, they did not completely disappear. Even though monotheists persecuted the old animist and polytheist religions, in many ways the animist and polytheist beliefs and practices continued to live on within the monotheist religions. Because most people have found it difficult to fully accept and digest the monotheist universal idea that there is only one God and that this one God cares about everybody equally. This was very hard for people to accept because sapiens, as we discussed in a previous lesson, they tend to divide the world into we versus they, and sapiens always want to be in contact with powerful entities that will help us against them. So the idea there is only one power, supreme power in the world, and that he cares about everybody equally, this was very difficult, even for Christians and Muslims, to fully accept and understand. Consequently, Christianity proclaimed publicly that there is only one God, and that nobody should worship any other gods. But simultaneously, Christianity created an entire new pantheon of saints, and people simply began to worship all kinds of Christian saints, just as previously they worshipped all kinds of different gods. In the Middle Ages, and even today to some extent, every Christian kingdom and state has its own patron saint that helps it to overcome difficulties and to win wars, even wars against other Christian countries. England, for example, was and is protected by St. George. Scotland is helped by a different saint, St. Andrew. Hungary is helped by St. Stephen, and France by St. Martin. So when England and France, the King of England and the King of France go to war in the Middle Ages, it is believed that St. Martin helps the French and St. George helps the English. It's just like the old gods. Not only countries, but also cities and towns and professions and even particular diseases, each had its own patron saint. For example, the city of Milan in Italy was protected by St. Ambroise, but the city of Venice was looked after by St. Mark. St. Elmo protected chimney cleaners. St. Matthew helped tax collectors in distress. When a tax collector was in trouble, he called on St. Matthew to help him because St. Matthew was the patron saint of tax collectors. If you suffered from a headache, you prayed to St. Agathius. He was responsible for headaches. But if you suffered from a toothache, then you prayed to St. Apollonia. She was responsible for helping with toothaches. The Christian saints did not merely resemble the old polytheistic gods. In many occasions, they were exactly the same gods in disguise. For example, in Ireland, the chief goddess of Celtic Ireland before the coming of Christianity to the island was Brigid, the goddess Brigid. When Ireland was converted to Christianity, people did not stop worshipping Brigid. They simply changed her name and story. They baptized her to Christianity. The Celtic goddess Brigid became the Catholic saint, Saint Brigid. And to this very day, the most revered saint in Catholic Ireland is Saint Brigid, the descendant of this polytheistic goddess. So in this way, polytheism, it gave birth to monotheism, and even though monotheism turned against its parent and tried to destroy polytheism, polytheism continued to survive within monotheism in all kinds of practices and beliefs. But polytheism did not give birth only to monotheistic religions. It gave birth to another kind of religion, to dualistic religions. Now, what are dualistic religions? Well, dualistic religions are religions that believe in the existence not of one supreme God, but of two opposing powers, good and evil, that battle for control of the world. Unlike monotheism, dualism believes that evil is an independent power which is not created by the good God and is not subordinate to it. Dualism explains that the entire world is a battleground between these two forces of good and evil, and everything that happens in the world is part of this struggle. Dualism is a very attractive worldview because it has a short and simple answer to one of the most basic problems of human thought, the problem of evil. The problem of evil is a fundamental philosophical and emotional problem. It asks, why is there evil in the world? Why is there so much suffering in the world? Why do so many bad things happen even to good people? Why do good people suffer? Now, for monotheists, the problem of evil is extremely difficult. Monotheists have to perform all kinds of amazing intellectual acrobatical tricks to explain how an all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good God allows so much suffering in the world. If God is so good, and He knows everything, and He can do everything, how come there are so many wars, and so many plagues, and so much poverty, and so much distress in the world? How can it be? One well-known answer that monotheists try to give is that this is God's way of allowing for human free will. If there was no evil in the world, humans could not choose between good and evil, and hence there would be no free will. This is one of these intellectual tricks that monotheists use to answer the problem of evil. This answer, however, immediately raises a number of new problems, questions. Freedom of will indeed allows humans to choose between good and evil, and some of them choose evil. And according to the standard monotheistic account, those people who choose evil, they are punished in hell forever and ever. Now, it can be asked, if God knew in advance that a particular person will use his or her free will to choose evil, and as a result, he or she will be punished for this evil choice by eternal tortures in hell, why did God choose to create this miserable person? Now, monotheistic theologians have written countless books to answer such difficult questions. Some people find the answers convincing, some people don't. What everybody can agree about is that monotheists have a very, very hard time with the problem of evil, with explaining how a perfectly good and all-powerful God allows so much suffering in the world. For dualists, on the other hand, it's very easy and simple to confront the problem of evil. Bad things, according to dualism, happen even to good people because the world is not governed by an all-knowing, all-powerful, and completely good God. There is an independent evil power loose in the world, and this evil power does bad things. Very easy explanation. This explanation is so simple and it is so compelling that even many monotheists tend to adopt it. Countless Christians and Muslims and Jews over the generations believed in the existence of a powerful evil force, which the Christians call the devil or Satan. And this force, according to popular belief, it can act independently of God and even rebel against and fight against God. Countless Christians and Muslims and Jews have gone so far as to imagine that the good God, even though it's all-powerful and all-knowing, needs our help in its struggle against the devil, against Satan. Now this is illogical. How can a monotheist adhere to such dualistic beliefs? Logically, it's impossible. If you believe in the existence of one single omnipotent God, then you can't believe in the existence of an independent evil power that works against God. If so, then God is not omnipotent. Still, humans have a wonderful capacity to believe in contradictions, to believe two things which are logically contradict each other. So it shouldn't come as such a big surprise that millions of pious Christians and Muslims and Jews manage to believe at one and the same time both in an omnipotent, all-powerful God and in an independent devil or Satan. So this is the attractiveness of the dualist belief in two opposing powers. But the dualist view also has its drawbacks, the things that it finds hard to explain. It's true that dualists offer a very simple solution to the problem of evil, but they have no good answer to the other big problem of human thought, philosophy, the problem of order. If there are two different and opposing powers in the world, one good and one evil, who made the laws governing the struggle between these two? Two rival states, say India and Pakistan, They can fight one another with tanks and bombs and missiles because both India and Pakistan exist in time and space, and both obey the same laws of physics. A missile which is launched from Pakistani ground can hit targets inside Indian territory because the same laws of physics apply in both countries. It is laws that were not legislated by the government of India or Pakistan. But when good and evil fight against each other, what common laws do both of them obey? And who made these laws? Dualists have a very hard time answering this question. So we see that dualists are good at explaining the problem of evil, but not the problem of order. Monotheists, those who believe in just one God, they are very good at explaining the problem of order. It's easy to explain the order in the world because there is just one God who made the laws that govern the whole universe. But they have a big problem explaining the problem of evil. There is, in fact, one logical way of settling the puzzle, of solving the problem of order and the problem of evil simultaneously. The logical way to solve it is to argue that there is a single omnipotent God that created the entire universe, and it is an evil God. Because there is just one God, this explains the order in the world, and because this God is evil, this explains why there is so much suffering in the world. But this idea, even though it's very logical, nobody in history wanted to believe such a thing, so no religion espouses this particular belief. Dualistic religions, such as, there are many of them. It's not just one religion dualism, just as monotheism. You have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and each of those is divided into different sects. So dualism also, it's not just one religion. There were many different dualistic religions. You had, for example, Zoroastrianism and Manichaeanism and Gnosticism, which flourished for many, many centuries and were the dominant religions in large parts of the Middle East and Central Asia from about 500 BC to about 500 AD. But eventually, in the great struggle between monotheism and dualism, monotheism won. And dualism almost disappeared, and today there are only a handful of dualistic communities surviving here and there in some pockets in India and the Middle East. Nevertheless, dualism is very important because the same thing that happened with polytheism happened also with dualism. Even though dualistic religions as such disappeared, dualistic ideas and practices and beliefs, they became an integral part of Judaism and Christianity and Islam. These monotheistic religions absorbed dualistic beliefs and practices into them. And many of the basic ideas today which we identify with Christianity and Islam are in fact dualist, both in their origin and in their main message and spirit. For example, the dualist belief in the existence of an evil God that fights against the good God is nowhere to be found in the Old Testament. It entered Judaism and Christianity and Islam in the shape of Satan, and it brought with it the belief that humans ought to help the good God in his fight against his enemies, which a belief that inspired all kinds of jihads and crusades and so forth. Now, in a purely monotheistic religion, the call for crusade or jihad is ridiculous. If God is omnipotent, he knows everything, he's all-powerful, he can do anything he likes, why does he need help from us humans in winning these wars? If God wants the Holy Land to belong to the Christians, he can just do like this, and that's it. Why go on crusade? So there is no logic in holy war in monotheism, there is logic in holy war in dualism. And because monotheism accepted so much baggage from dualism, it also accepted this idea of going to holy war to help the good God in its fight against the enemies. The last great idea that entered monotheism from dualism is the belief in heaven and hell. Heaven, the realm of the good God, and hell, the realm of the evil God, is a dualist belief. These are dualist concepts. There is no trace of these ideas in the Old Testament. The Old Testament never says anywhere that the souls of people continue to live after they die, that they leave the body and reach heaven or reach hell. It's never written anywhere that the soul of Moses or Abraham or Isaac, after he dies, it left the body and reached heaven, or that the soul of evil Pharaoh, after he died, left the body and reached hell. These are, again, ideas that make no sense from a monotheistic perspective. But they entered monotheism from dualism and then became an integral part of what most people consider to be the monotheist, the Christian or Muslim view of the world. So monotheism is in fact a kind of mishmash, a kind of bringing together all kinds of monotheist, dualist, polytheist and animist legacies, which are constantly influencing each other and changing each other, all coexisting inside one big, under one big divine umbrella. The average Christian believes in the monotheistic God, but also believes in the dualist devil, in the polytheist saints, and in the animist ghosts and demons. All these religions which we have discussed so far, polytheism, monotheism, dualism, they have differences between them, but they are also very similar to one another, particularly in the fact that they all focus on belief in gods. One God, or two gods, or many gods, but gods are central to these religions. Now, this seems obvious to Westerners who are familiar mainly with monotheistic and polytheistic religions. In fact, however, the religious history of the world does not boil down to the history of gods. Already during the first millennium BC, the world began to see the rise of another kind of religions, religions that do not give so much importance to gods. We will discuss these religions and the impact that they had on the world in the next segment of this lesson.